In a single moment, Clara Thompson felt her entire life collapse. Her eyes fixed on the trail of saliva sliding down her cheek and along the collar of her blouse. Never in 63 years had she endured such humiliation. It was that woman, Chloe, her daughter-in-law, who had done it, an act too degrading to fully capture in words. And even more painful, her son Ethan had stood beside them without a single word of protest, even defending his wife. A numbness wrapped around Clara, leaving her unable to think. She simply stood there, the warmth of the spit still clinging to her skin while inside her chest anger rose minute by minute. Since when had she become a woman so easily disrespected in her own home? Clara, a woman who had endured countless trials throughout her life, now had to bear this disgrace. She said nothing, quietly walked upstairs, locked her bedroom door, and sat there in a suffocating silence. She did not cry. She did not feel the urge to scream. The only sensation settling into her mind was coldness. After years of hardship raising her children, sacrificing more than anyone could see to protect them, now that she needed them, they had betrayed her. Since her husband's death, Clara had lived alone. She had grown used to the stillness of the large house. It brought her a quiet peace, a small private comfort. Then Ethan and Chloe arrived, bringing constant tension with them. They said it was only temporary. But that temporary stay had stretched into 6 months, and during that time, Clara had cleaned, repaired, adjusted, and yielded, only to receive bitter remarks from her daughter-in-law and a disappointing silence from her son. It began with Chloe rearranging the kitchen without asking. Clara could not help feeling irritated, yet she tried to restrain herself. The kitchen was where she carefully prepared every meal, where she found calm in a life once filled with responsibility. Chloe did not understand that. She openly criticized Clara, calling her old-fashioned, unwilling to change, even mocking her for the absence of her late husband. Those words were no longer harmless comments. They became blades driven straight into Clara's heart. Mother and son soon found themselves in confrontation. Clara hoped only for a small measure of understanding from Ethan. Instead of defending her, he simply said, "Mother, maybe you should be a little more flexible." The sentence struck her like a slap. She could not believe it. How could a mother be treated this way? How could a son stand beside his wife and forget the woman who had raised him all those years? Chloe did not stop there. She stepped closer to Clara, looked directly into her eyes with undisguised hatred, and in front of the entire household she spat in her face. It was not an accident. It was deliberate, unmistakable contempt. Clara remained still, feeling the warm saliva sliding down her skin, her mind nearly frozen. She looked at Ethan, expecting comfort, protection, some defense from her son. But Ethan only sighed, shook his head, and said, "Mother, you are overreacting. We did not mean anything by it." In that moment, an unavoidable decision began forming within Clara. She left the room, went upstairs, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed. The feeling of abandonment and disdain was not new to her, but this time it was different. It felt like a wolf gnawing at her heart minute by minute. She thought about the past, about how much she had sacrificed for her family, how she had given up personal joys just to protect her children. And now she was treated like this. Clara did not cry. She sat quietly in the darkness as time passed, a chilling emotion slowly taking hold of her, the sting of wounded dignity. She realized that she had not only lost respect from her children, but from herself. Yet instead of drowning in sorrow, Clara began to form a plan. Clara Thompson, the gentle mother everyone assumed was weak, was beginning to change. A woman who had spent her entire life sacrificing would no longer allow anyone, not even her own children, to treat her with contempt. That night, she decided she would not let this pass. In just one night, Clara envisioned her plan, a plan that would leave everyone astonished. Clara woke before dawn had fully broken, the faint light not yet reaching through the window. She rose to her feet, her hands trembling slightly as they touched the cold surface of the kitchen table. Yesterday, the trace of Chloe's spit had still lingered on her cheek, but today, Clara no longer felt humiliation. That feeling had retreated, making way for something else, determination. She was no longer the weak woman her children believed her to be. She would reclaim control, starting with this very house. That powerful, cold sensation shaped her decision. She stepped into the kitchen, where the scent of pancakes and bacon soon began to spread. The familiar aroma made Clara feel as though she were returning to herself. This was not just an ordinary breakfast. It was a declaration of strength, of awakening after so many years of endurance. She prepared everything with care, from the golden pancakes to the fresh fruit and the crisp strips of bacon. Every movement carried intention. She wanted to show that even if she had been looked down upon, even if she had been hurt, she could still stand firm. No one could strip away her dignity, not even her own children. When she finished setting the table, Clara sat down and took a slow sip of coffee, allowing it to settle within her. The warmth spread through her body, easing the tension that had been coiling inside her chest. She did not have much time. Today would be the day she made her final decision, and everything would change forever. Ethan and Chloe were still asleep, neither of them coming downstairs yet. Clara knew this would be a special day. She would not allow herself to step back again. When they woke, there would be a truth they could not avoid. Before long, she heard footsteps on the stairs. The door opened, and one by one, Ethan and Chloe entered the kitchen. Both paused, their eyes fixed on the table filled with food, as if they could not believe what they were seeing. "Oh my God, Mom, you made all this morning," Ethan asked, but his voice carried neither surprise nor joy, only a cold satisfaction. "Just enough for us to sit down and talk," Clara replied evenly. She looked at Chloe, who stood quietly beside Ethan, her hand gripping her purse tightly as if preparing for a confrontation. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down without once looking at Clara. "Mom, you finally understand that you need to accept change. I told you. You cannot keep living in that old-fashioned world forever." Clara did not respond immediately. She simply looked at the plate of pancakes, scooped up a bite, and ate. Every action she took was marked by an unsettling calm. After a moment, she lifted her head, and the firmness in her eyes made Chloe feel an involuntary shiver. "Ethan," Clara said softly, yet her voice carried unmistakable strength. "We need to have a serious conversation. From now on, everything will be different. We cannot continue like this." Ethan did not answer right away. He glanced at Chloe, then back at his mother, hesitation flickering across his face. "What are you planning to do now? We are not going to live like this anymore. I will not allow myself to be disrespected, and I will not let you hurt me again," Clara said, her voice hard as steel, each word weighted with clarity. Chloe frowned and abruptly stood up. "What are you talking about? We have been living with you for how long, and now you are." "Chloe," Clara interrupted, not allowing her to continue. "I do not want to hear excuses. We are going to make an agreement. If you want to stay, you must accept my conditions." Ethan and Chloe looked at each other, their eyes filled with unease. They knew this was not a conversation they could simply brush aside. Clara was truly serious. "What conditions?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering as he began to grasp the gravity of the moment. Clara pulled a sheet of paper from her pocket and placed it on the table. "This is a new contract. You will pay rent every month. You will attend a financial management course. And most importantly, you will respect me. Otherwise, you will have to leave immediately." Chloe let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Are you joking?" Clara met her gaze without the slightest wavering. "This is not a joke. You need to change, or you will have nowhere to stay. And if you choose to leave, I will not stop you." Clara's words struck Ethan and Chloe like heavy blows. The earlier contempt, the dismissive actions, seemed to have wounded too deeply to be undone. And now Clara was no longer merely a submissive mother. She was the one controlling the game. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. Chloe fell silent, her eyes burning with anger, while Ethan sat back, his hands relaxed yet his mind in turmoil. A long pause stretched between them, as if all three were searching for a way to process what was happening. At last, Chloe broke the silence. "Do you really think we are going to sign this contract?" Clara looked into her eyes, then gently placed her hand on the table. "If you truly want to stay, you will sign. If not, you may find another place to go." The tension rose like a swelling wave, but Clara did not falter. She knew this was the moment to change everything, to ensure she would never again have to look back at her own weakness. Clara sat in the living room as the faint morning light filtered through the curtains and fell across her face, highlighting the lines time had etched there. The cold, resolute feeling from the day before had not left her. That breakfast had not simply been a meal. It had been a clear and undeniable message that she was no longer the weak woman her family could look down on. She had made her decision, and no matter what happened, she would not change it. Ethan's words still echoed in her mind. "Mother, I do not think you need to make such a big deal out of this." She could hear the disrespect in every syllable, and it only strengthened her resolve to act. Ethan might not understand, but she no longer needed his agreement. Clara had decided that even if she had to face betrayal from her own children, she would stand up and protect herself. Today, she would lay out conditions that Ethan and Chloe could not ignore. She had prepared herself mentally for this confrontation, though deep inside there was still a trace of hesitation, a quiet sadness at having to make such a choice. Even so, she knew that if she did not act now, she would never regain control. At 11 in the morning, as Clara sat reading the newspaper in the living room, the sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Ethan and Chloe appeared, but this time they did not carry the same dismissive air as before. Both looked tense, as if they had realized that nothing would be the same again. They sat down in the chairs across from Clara, neither speaking first. Clara did not rush. She remained seated in a silence that radiated authority, as though waiting for them to voice what weighed on their hearts. After a long while, Chloe finally spoke. "Mother, we cannot keep going on like this. We just want a little space, a little freedom," Chloe said, her voice faltering, slightly weak. Clara did not respond immediately, only looked at her with a sharp, unyielding gaze. She knew that after everything that had happened, Chloe still had not truly grasped the seriousness of the situation. She only wanted to continue living in comfort, while Clara could no longer tolerate even another minute of disrespect. "Chloe, I have already said this," Clara began, her voice calm yet cutting. "I will not allow you to continue living off me. You are capable of finding work, earning money, and living independently. What I will not accept is your behavior, as if I exist only to provide everything without receiving respect in return." Chloe straightened, her expression shifting from irritation to anger. She bit her lip but said nothing. Clara was not shaken by that anger and continued. "You cannot keep living like this. You must understand that this is the respect I require from you. If you want to stay, you will sign this contract." Clara opened a folder on the table, took out a sheet of paper, and began explaining each clause. They would pay monthly rent, attend a financial management course, and most importantly, follow a code of conduct she had established. If there was any act of disrespect, they would have to leave immediately. These were not terms meant to punish them, but to protect herself and to help them realize that life could not continue this way. Ethan glanced at Chloe and then back at Clara, his face filled with weariness and concern. They had lived with Clara for a long time and knew she was not someone easily swayed. Even so, these conditions were difficult to accept. Ethan sighed and placed his hand on the table, as if weighing everything carefully. "Mother, I understand that you want us to be independent," he began heavily, "but we truly cannot find another place to live right away. It is not as simple as you think." Clara looked at her son without a trace of pity. "Ethan, I cannot continue providing what you do not deserve. I have spent my entire life caring for you, but I cannot do everything for you forever. It is time for you to stand up and walk on your own 2 feet." Chloe suddenly stood, furious. "Mother, how can you treat us like this? All we need is a little time to find work and a place to live, not to be forced out immediately." "Chloe, I am not forcing you out," Clara replied, her voice still composed yet commanding. "I am only asking you to do what is necessary to stand on your own. No one in this life can help you forever except yourselves." Silence filled the room. Chloe stood there, her face burning with anger and disappointment. Ethan did not dare add anything more, sitting still with his eyes lowered to the table as if contemplating his mother's words. Clara knew they could not easily accept all of this, but she could not and would not change her decision. The turning point had arrived. It was the moment Clara understood she had to be stronger than ever. She had lived her life for her family, for her children, but now she had to live for herself. And if they could not respect her, she would not hesitate to ask them to leave. "The decision is yours," Clara said firmly. I will not change. You may choose, but do not let your choice destroy your future. Ethan and Chloe remained silent, reflecting on what they had heard, and Clara knew they had realized there was no turning back. Clara stood by the window as the first rays of sunlight gently streamed into the room, illuminating the lines etched across her face. Everything was silent and still, as if the entire space were waiting for something significant to unfold. Since yesterday morning, after the confrontation with Ethan and Chloe, Clara had known that change could not be postponed any longer. She had prepared everything for today's meeting, a meeting that was not merely about money or living arrangements, but about power, respect, and the transformation she needed to enforce. She was no stranger to this feeling, the feeling of a woman who had been overlooked and underestimated, yet who finally rose to reclaim her place. Everything she had done, from raising her children to the sacrifices made throughout her life, had led to this moment. Clara had been patient for far too long, and now she could not wait any further. It was time for a clear decision, one with no turning back. That morning, Ethan and Chloe entered the kitchen, but this time their expressions were no longer casual or carefree. The silence in the air felt heavier than ever. Both hesitated, as if aware that this meeting would be unlike any before. They could no longer continue playing the role of temporary guests. They had to face the truth that Clara was no longer someone they could deceive or take advantage of. I know what you want, Ethan spoke first, his voice lacking confidence. Clara lifted her gaze, her sharp eyes fixed directly on her son. She did not want to hear excuses anymore. Then say it plainly, Clara replied, her tone gentle yet firm, as if inviting honesty from him. Ethan sat down at the table, unable to meet her eyes, as though afraid the truth would wound him. Mother, we cannot find another place to live right away. Our financial situation is not stable. Chloe just lost her job, and I have not found steady work yet. Clara listened in silence without interrupting. She understood their difficulties, but that could not justify prolonging the situation indefinitely. So what are you going to do to change it? Clara asked, without sympathy. Sit there and hope everything fixes itself, or take action. Chloe sat quietly to one side, her head lowered, not daring to look at Clara. She knew she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way to turn back. Clara was no longer someone who could be subdued. Everything she had endured, everything she had sacrificed, had brought her to the point of asserting her authority once again. Mother, I am sorry, Chloe finally said after a long silence. Her voice was weak, yet there was a subtle shift in her tone. We know you do not want to keep helping us, but I truly do not know what to do now. I cannot afford to lose everything. Clara looked at Chloe and saw no deep remorse in her eyes. Still, she understood that Chloe had no other option but to apologize. She had been pushed into a corner and was searching for a way out, even knowing that Clara was not someone who forgave easily. Clara quietly rose and walked to the table, opening the contract she had prepared beforehand. She did not rush, only calmly placing it in front of Ethan and Chloe. These are my conditions. You may choose either sign this or leave. She said nothing more, yet her gaze carried enough force to make them feel the weight of pressure. The contract was not long, but it contained unavoidable terms. They would have to secure employment, pay monthly rent, attend a financial course, and most importantly, respect Clara as the rightful authority in this house. If there was any act of disrespect, the contract would be terminated immediately, and they would have to leave without explanation. Ethan studied the document, hesitation crossing his face. He glanced at Chloe, then back at Clara, as if searching for understanding. But Clara had none left to give. She had been patient long enough. Now it was time for them to stand on their own. I will sign, Ethan finally said after a prolonged silence, his voice soft yet determined. But you must understand that we cannot change everything overnight. Clara did not respond. She simply picked up a pen and handed it to him. And you, Chloe, will you sign? Chloe looked at Clara, then at the contract. She could feel the cold intensity in Clara's eyes. There was no alternative. Perhaps they could not transform their lives immediately, but without this change, they would lose everything. Chloe took the pen, her hand trembling as she signed her name. It was done. Clara knew these conditions would not be easy to fulfill, but at least This was the first step toward forcing Ethan and Chloe to face reality, a life where they could no longer depend on her forever. And Clara also understood that once they had signed this contract, nothing would ever be the same again. After they finished signing, Clara looked at them once more and spoke with unmistakable authority. "Remember this. I will never go back on this decision. You may change, but only if you prove that you are worthy." In that moment, Clara felt a surge of pride, a powerful sense of strength she had never experienced before. Her life would no longer be defined by silent endurance. She had taken back control. Clara sat down on the long couch in the living room, slowly turning a cup of cold coffee in her hands, her thoughtful gaze drifting through the window toward the garden outside. The sunlight had finally filled the house. Yet inside Clara, everything still felt dim. She understood that what had just happened was not the end. In truth, it was only the beginning of a journey that she and her children would have to walk together, facing challenges they had never imagined. Ethan and Chloe had signed the contract. Although hesitation had been written clearly across their faces, Clara sensed that something in them had shifted. But would that change truly last? Would they genuinely commit to transforming themselves? Or were they simply complying to avoid consequences they could not escape? Clara did not know, but she would not step back. She had already made her decision. The previous evening, after they signed, Clara prepared a simple dinner, yet it carried a quiet solemnity. It was not merely a family meal. It was an unspoken ceremony, a decisive moment. Every dish, every small detail held meaning. Clara was not just serving them food, she was offering them an opportunity, and that was all she could give. Today, she received no particular reaction from Ethan and Chloe. They were not cheerful, yet they showed no resistance either. Clara felt that perhaps this was the time for everything to slowly settle within them. Still, she knew nothing had ever been easy. As each day passed, part of her felt as though she were waiting for something greater, another test that could arrive at any moment. And it did. Only 3 days after signing the contract, Chloe suddenly returned to Clara, her face pale. Without speaking, she silently placed a sheet of paper on the table, a letter from the company where she had once worked. Clara looked at it, unease rising within her. The letter stated that the company had launched an investigation into Chloe's conduct during her employment. She was suspected of fraudulent billing and unclear expense claims. Chloe had never told Clara about this, and now everything was on the verge of being exposed. Clara did not respond immediately. She simply looked at Chloe, not with anger, but with a deep and heavy silence. Chloe began to grow uneasy under that lack of reaction. "Mother, I know I was wrong, but I do not want this to come out. Everything will be ruined," Chloe said, her voice trembling with fear, her eyes glistening with tears. Clara did not rush to answer. She understood that Chloe was trying to protect herself, but this was not the moment to excuse her mistakes. "Chloe," Clara said steadily, without anger, "do you think you can hide the truth forever? You must face the consequences of your actions, whether you want to or not." Ethan stood by the doorway, his expression filled with worry. He knew this could unleash another storm, and this time he could not remain on the sidelines. "Mother, please do not make this more complicated." "Chloe realizes her mistake," Ethan said awkwardly, his voice carrying a hint of pleading. Clara did not turn to look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Chloe. "Not everything can be forgiven so easily, Ethan. What Chloe did affects not only herself but this entire family, especially me. If she refuses to confront what she has done, how can she ever truly change?" This time, Ethan fell silent. He no longer argued. He looked at his mother and saw in her eyes a determination he had never witnessed before. Perhaps he had grown too accustomed to a Clara who was fragile and eager to please. But this was no longer the Clara he once knew. Chloe slowly stood, her hands trembling as she gripped the back of a chair, her eyes still wet with tears. "I am sorry, Mother. I know I was wrong, but I do not want this to go too far. I will try to repay all the money I took." Clara rose and walked toward Chloe, step by step. She did not speak at once. Instead, she placed a hand gently on Chloe's shoulder and looked into her eyes with the patience only a mother could hold. "Chloe, you do not have to repay everything immediately, but you must learn to take responsibility for your actions. No one can live forever in the past, but no one can ignore what they have done either. Chloe began to cry, not out of fear, but because she finally understood the importance of standing up and facing the truth. Yet this was not an easy release. Clara had created a space for those emotions to surface, but she also knew the road ahead would not be simple. Today, Clara had not only helped Chloe, she had saved herself as well. She was no longer a woman who only sacrificed and endured. She was someone who stood firm, who claimed ownership of her life, and who made decisions that changed not only herself, but those around her. Chloe and Ethan had learned a powerful lesson, but would they truly change, or would they once again search for ways to escape responsibility? Clara did not know, yet she would never allow anyone, not even her own children, to look down on her again. Clara sat on the long couch in the living room, her eyes fixed on the signed contract lying neatly on the table before her. Everything around her seemed unusually still. Although what had happened with Chloe had forced Clara to face immense pressure, the determination inside her had not shifted. Part of her even felt relieved that everything was finally out in the open. She had made her decision, and now it was time for others to take responsibility for their own actions. She was no longer the weak mother Ethan and Chloe once believed her to be. For so long, she had given everything to protect her family, yet those very sacrifices had made her easy to take advantage of. Now Clara understood that if she wanted respect, she had to begin with herself. There would be no more indulgence, no easy forgiveness for repeated mistakes. Chloe had lowered her head and admitted her wrongdoing. She had apologized, but Clara knew that words alone could not repair everything. What mattered most was whether Chloe had truly learned the lesson of honesty and responsibility. Clara did not believe in empty promises. She needed to see real action from her daughter. Ethan, too, was no longer able to hide from responsibility as easily as before. He had witnessed his mother's transformation, and it forced him to reconsider what he had done and what he had failed to do. Clara knew Ethan was not yet fully mature. He still dreamed of easy paths and searched for excuses to avoid facing reality. But this time, she could not allow him to continue like that. She needed him to understand that life would not always move along effortlessly. The following day, Clara maintained her strict stance. She required Ethan and Chloe to begin forming concrete plans to find work, pay rent, and fully comply with the terms of the contract. She no longer accepted vague explanations. Just as she had predicted, life did not suddenly change for Ethan and Chloe after signing. Everything seemed the same, except now silence and avoidance slowly created distance between them and Clara. Chloe began showing signs of resistance. She secretly met with friends and shared how she could not live under Clara's conditions. Clara discovered these conversations through messages on Chloe's phone. She was not surprised because she knew Chloe had not truly accepted what she had signed. Instead of anger, Clara only smiled quietly and said nothing. She understood that in any process of change, there would always be moments that tested patience. Facing this resistance, Clara decided she would not allow it to shake her resolve. A week later, she asked Ethan and Chloe to report on their job plans. As expected, hollow explanations surfaced once more. Ethan admitted he had not found the work he wanted, while Chloe continued blaming circumstances. Their excuses deepened Clara's disappointment. She realized they still had not fully grasped their responsibility. "Do you think I can keep helping you forever?" Clara asked, her voice gentle yet sharp. Neither dared to answer, but she could see hesitation in their eyes. She refused to let herself feel defeated, even though she knew this was not easy. Part of her felt disappointment, yet another part overflowed with determination. "No one in this life hands you ease," Clara continued. "You may complain and blame your circumstances, but that is life. If you do nothing to change it, nothing will ever change." Ethan lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. He had once believed that with enough time and persuasion, his mother would soften. But Clara was no longer someone who could be manipulated by comfort. She had tolerated many things in the past, yet this time she was too exhausted by her own former weakness. Chloe finally spoke. "Mother, I was wrong, but I just feel tired. I do not know if I can do this." Clara looked at her and once again sensed the fragility in her daughter's words. She sighed, not out of regret, but from understanding that words alone were not enough. Change could not come from apology alone. She had seen too much pretense and too much avoidance of responsibility before. This time, she would not allow the pattern to continue. Chloe, you have been given the opportunity to change. Instead of trying to escape, you must face it. I have created the opportunity for you. Now it is your turn to truly do the work, Clara said, her voice firm and unyielding. Ethan and Chloe fell silent. Yet in their eyes, Clara saw that her words had forced them to reflect. They could no longer remain in the illusion they had built for themselves for so long. A life without responsibility, without purpose, would never bring genuine happiness. Even so, Clara remained unwavering. This was not a battle against Ethan and Chloe. It was a battle within herself. She knew that change was a long process and would not bring immediate results, but she also understood that without these boundaries, her life would forever be controlled by others. Every step Clara took now was steady, and though it hurt, she knew this was the only way to protect both herself and her family. Clara woke up early as usual, but today something felt different. The feeling inside her was no longer the anxious silence of previous days, but a powerful sense of determination. She knew the challenges she had faced were only the beginning. Ethan and Chloe had signed the contract. They had committed to change, but would they truly follow through? Clara could not help feeling concerned about what would happen next. She had done everything she could to help them, yet the final decision still rested in their own hands. Yesterday, Ethan and Chloe had remained silent when she asked them to fulfill the conditions in the contract. Apologies and excuses for delay kept surfacing. They said that finding a job was not easy, but Clara knew the real issue was that they did not genuinely want to change. All they needed was a strong awakening to realize that life could not continue this way. Clara could no longer be the only one carrying everything. That was why today she would not forgive any laziness. After breakfast, Clara asked Ethan and Chloe to come to the living room. She said nothing, simply sitting there waiting for them like a commander waiting for her warriors. Ethan and Chloe walked in with anxious eyes, yet Clara showed no sign of softness. She knew it was time for them to understand that life was not a game. "We need to talk," Clara said, her voice calm yet sharp. She looked straight into both of their eyes without looking away for a single second. "I gave you time, but that time is over. You made a commitment, and now you need to fulfill it." Chloe lowered her head, not daring to meet her mother's eyes. Ethan, though older, still did not have a strong enough gaze. Clara was not surprised by their reaction. She was far too familiar with her children's avoidance and lack of responsibility. But this time, she could not allow them to continue living like that. Ethan, Chloe, Clara continued without missing a word. Every day you do not look for work, every day you do not contribute to making this life better, is a day you waste your own time. You can say you are tired. You can blame everything around you, but you know what? Life never blames anyone. It keeps moving, and if you do not keep up, it will leave you behind. Ethan bit his lip as if struggling with a major decision. He did not want to face the truth, but Clara knew this might be the last time she had to be this firm. If not now, there would never be another opportunity. After a long silence, Chloe finally spoke. "Mom, I know I was wrong, but I do not know where to start. I do not know if I can change the way you expect me to." Her voice trembled, fear evident in every word. Clara looked at her daughter. This was not the time for pity. She was too tired of apologies. "Chloe, you cannot change everything with words alone. What you need is action. Starting today, if you do not find a job, if you do not comply with the conditions in the contract, then you will have to leave. I will not keep anyone who does not want to change." A moment of silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking clock in the background. Clara clearly felt the tension in the air. She knew this was not easy, but without these strong words, Ethan and Chloe would never understand the seriousness of the situation. "Do you understand?" Clara asked, her voice gentle yet full of authority. She waited for their response. Even the smallest sign would be enough for her to sense change. Ethan looked at his mother for a long moment, then sighed. "I understand. I will try." There was no more avoidance in his eyes, though a trace of unease remained. Clara looked at him and said nothing more. She knew that even if change would not happen immediately, At least today, Ethan had begun to become aware. Chloe, still slightly anxious, no longer tried to justify herself. I will do it. I will find a job and follow what you ask. Her voice was no longer hesitant, but carried a quiet commitment. Clara nodded without saying anything further. She did not need to say much, because all she needed was for them to understand the importance of what she had said. They had been given an opportunity, but if they did not know how to seize it, they would have no one to blame. That day passed in heavy silence. Clara knew this was only the first step, yet she could not help feeling a small sense of satisfaction. She had not stepped back. She had held her ground, and at least today, Ethan and Chloe had been forced to face reality. She was no longer the weak woman who could be taken advantage of. Clara Thompson had truly changed. She was not only a mother, but the head of this family. Clara looked at the wall clock, its hour and minute hands seeming to run backward through time. Waiting had always been the thing she hated most, yet today was another day testing her patience. She could not stop thinking about Ethan and Chloe, about the promises they had made. A week had passed since that firm confrontation, and Clara could not help wondering whether they had truly changed. She understood that children would not always follow their mother's guidance, but she also knew one thing with certainty. This time she could not do everything for them. Throughout the entire week, Clara had not seen any encouraging signs from Ethan and Chloe. Although they complained less than before, what she needed from them, real action, had yet to appear. They still clung to old habits, never truly determined in their job search, and the excuses they offered were far too easy for Clara to see through as insincere. She had prepared herself for this, yet she could not deny that each day without change deepened her disappointment. This morning, Clara decided she would give them no more chances. She had been too tolerant, too patient. It was time for her to act firmly, so they would understand that without change, everything would collapse. She decided she would wait until the end of the day to see what they would do. Just as she had predicted, that morning passed in heavy silence. Ethan and Chloe asked nothing, offered no excuses to justify their lack of determination. Clara told herself that perhaps it was time to put an end to this delay. She walked down to the dining room and sat at the table the family had used for many years. Breakfast was carefully prepared, just like in the early days when Clara simply wanted everyone to feel comfortable. But today, breakfast was not just a meal, it was a reminder. When Ethan and Chloe entered the dining room, they sensed something different in the air. Everything looked the same, yet the way Clara sat at the table made them feel as though they were about to face a major test. None of the three spoke until Clara looked up and broke the silence. "You may sit down," Clara said, her voice low and calm, yet carrying undeniable resolve. "Today, I will not let this drag on any longer. You need to show what you will do to prove that you are ready to change." Ethan sat down first, his face tense. Chloe looked uncomfortable as well, but she said nothing and quietly took a seat beside him. Clara did not wait any longer. She made her decision. "I gave you 1 week to look for work, to begin fulfilling the terms of the contract," Clara said, each word carrying weight. "But until now, I have not seen any truly meaningful change. No job has been secured. No real commitment has been carried out." Ethan looked at his mother, his eyes filled with confusion and a trace of guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but Clara interrupted him. "Do not give me excuses. Do not tell me you had no opportunities or could not find a suitable job. I know you are capable, but you choose laziness. You choose to blame instead of act," Clara continued, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "If you do not change today, I will have nothing more to say." Chloe opened her mouth, but only empty apologies came out. "Mom, I tried. I do not want to disappoint you, but things are not as easy as you think. I have not found a suitable job yet." "Chloe," Clara cut in, her voice steady. "Work is not always easy, but you must make the effort to search. If you only sit and wait for things to come to you, you will never have anything worthwhile. Life is not easy for anyone, and if you cannot see that, I will not continue allowing you to live in illusion." The air in the room grew thick, tense enough for Clara to feel the weight of her own words. Ethan and Chloe did not respond immediately. They simply sat there, eyes lowered, hands clenched, as if wrestling with their own thoughts. At last, Ethan spoke first. Mom, I cannot do it differently. I have tried, but things did not turn out the way I expected. His voice was weary, yet there was no defiance or denial. So you are just giving up, Clara asked, each word piercing through him. Ethan, you are no longer a child. You must stand up and take control of your own life. If you cannot do that, you will never become the person you want to be. I cannot keep helping you forever. Clara's words left Ethan silent. He knew she was right. He could not continue living in Clara's shadow, waiting for opportunities to appear without effort. He needed to act, and he needed to act now. Chloe remained quiet, her eyes glistening though she did not cry. She looked at Clara and realized her mother had changed, and she no longer had any path except to face what she had done. Finally, Ethan sighed and looked at his mother. I will find a job. I will do what you ask. I do not want to miss this opportunity anymore. Clara nodded without saying anything further. She knew that although change had not come immediately, at least today Ethan and Chloe had begun to understand that life could not pass by easily forever. This was the first step, and Clara would not stop until they truly changed. Clara stood in the living room, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, her eyes gazing out the window. The gentle morning breeze carried the cool touch of autumn. The space around her seemed quiet and still, yet inside Clara, her thoughts and emotions were surging intensely. A week had passed since she asked Ethan and Chloe to change, and up to this moment, she had not seen any real sign from them. Although they no longer made as many excuses as before, the true change Clara needed, perseverance and determination, was still missing. She knew she could not keep waiting any longer. The promises from Ethan and Chloe had been nothing more than words. They had signed the contract, they had agreed, but now the real actions were absent. She could not even remember how many times she had advised them, encouraged them, and demanded that they be more serious, yet it seemed they were still not truly ready. Clara felt that if she did not push them, if she did not make things clear once again, there would never be any change. That morning, Clara decided she would not allow them to continue delaying. She had been patient for too long. It was time to end the silence, the endurance, and begin again with action. She could not stand by and watch them live under the illusion that everything would change without effort. When Ethan and Chloe walked into the living room that morning, Clara was ready for this important conversation. She no longer wanted to handle things gently or tolerate them. It had all been more than enough. Now was the time to reaffirm her strength and make them face reality. Ethan entered first, his expression slightly tense, though he tried to remain calm. Chloe followed behind, her face unable to hide her unease. They sat down without speaking, silence covering the room. Clara sat opposite them, her gaze cool yet decisive. Finally, she broke the silence. You have had 1 week to begin changing, and now I want to know what you have done to prove that you truly want to change, Clara said, her voice steady and unshakable. Over the past week, I have not seen any meaningful effort from either of you, and I no longer have time to wait. Ethan glanced at Chloe, then back at his mother. He felt embarrassed, yet he could not deny that what Clara said was true. He knew he had not done enough to change the situation, but he did not know where to begin. The excuses forming in his mind suddenly seemed meaningless. He could not continue blaming circumstances, could not continue blaming the fact that he had not found a job. Mom, I have been looking for work, but I could not find a good job like I expected. Ethan finally said, his voice revealing confusion. Clara looked straight at him without sympathy. Ethan, you cannot keep repeating those reasons. Finding a job is not easy, but it is your responsibility. I have done everything I could to help you, but you cannot just stand there and wait for opportunities to come. If you do not want to change, I will not force you anymore. You must decide for yourselves. Chloe remained silent. She knew Clara's words could not be ignored. Yet inside, she also felt her mother's disappointment. Each word from Clara felt like a weight pressing on her chest, as if she were facing a reality she could no longer escape. Mom, I do not know how to change. I do not want to disappoint you, but I do not know where to start, Chloe said, her voice trembling as if holding back a storm within. Clara did not answer immediately. She wanted to give them time to think. Sometimes nothing was more powerful than silence. She looked at them, letting them feel the seriousness of her words. Chloe, if you do not start somewhere, you will never know. Do not wait until it is too late. Begin with the smallest steps. Find a temporary job, start earning money, learn to manage your expenses. No one can support you forever, Chloe, Clara said gently yet firmly. And if you cannot do these things, then I cannot allow you to continue living depending on me. Ethan finally spoke again, this time his voice stronger. I will do it. I will find a job, Mom. I promise I will change. There was a new determination in his eyes. He did not want to fail, did not want to disappoint his mother any further. Chloe had no choice but to look at her mother with regret in her eyes. I will find a job and do what you ask. I will not disappoint you again. She lowered her head, finally accepting that she could not live forever in her mother's shadow. Clara nodded without saying anything more. She knew these promises were still not enough, but at least today they had begun stepping onto the right path. Clara did not expect immediate change, but she knew that if they could maintain this determination, things would gradually shift. That day ended in silence. Ethan and Chloe had truly spoken with Clara for the first time in a long while. She knew this was only the first step in a long journey ahead, but at least today, something had begun to change. And Clara, at last, felt that she had done the right thing. Clara stood by the window looking out, the first rays of morning sunlight shining down over the garden. The fresh air brought her a sense of lightness, yet inside, a heavy feeling still lingered. Everything seemed to be slowly returning to normal, but Clara knew she could not allow herself to be easily satisfied with the small changes she had just witnessed. Ethan and Chloe had taken their first steps, yet true transformation still lay a long road ahead. Only a week had passed since that tense conversation, and she could not be certain that their words would truly be carried out. The sense of disappointment gradually settled as Clara realized this was the moment she needed to create an even greater turning point. She could not continue standing on the sidelines, waiting for change to happen through words and promises alone. Clara needed to act, and if necessary, she needed to be firmer than ever. Everything she had done throughout her life was not meant to end with watching her children miss opportunities, ignore responsibility, and fall into the trap of laziness and delay. That morning, Clara decided there would be another conversation, once again, not to warn them, but to put an end to stagnation and meaningless words. If they refused to change, Clara would not hold on for another moment. She had been too tolerant, and now it was time to reassess everything and become even stronger. When Clara walked into the dining room, Ethan and Chloe were already sitting there, silent as if they knew this day would not be as easy as the previous ones. Their faces no longer showed avoidance, yet tension was clearly present in the air. They knew their mother, and they knew Clara would not let things pass easily. You promised me, Clara began, her voice steady and without hesitation, but all I see is delay. I no longer have time to wait for you to come up with reasons. If you cannot act now, I cannot help you any further. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes filled with worry. Mom, I found a job, but it is not the job I hoped for. I have faced many difficulties. I am trying. Clara looked at him without sympathy. Ethan, facing difficulties is not a reason to stop. If you cannot find a way to overcome this challenge, you will never grow up. All I need is action, not words. If you cannot do that, then there is nothing more I can do to help. Chloe lowered her head, tears forming in her eyes. I know you have done so much for us, but I feel tired. I do not know where to begin. Clara did not soften. She stepped closer to Chloe and looked into her eyes firmly. You cannot live your whole life in exhaustion. Every day you can choose to rest, or you can choose to stand up and move forward. Life does not allow you to sit still and expect everything to come to you. You must keep moving no matter how tired you feel. That is how you grow. The air in the room grew heavy. Clara knew her words would not be easy to accept, but she was too tired of apologies and useless excuses. She had given them enough opportunities. Now it was time for real action. Today, I require you to begin acting. You must look for work immediately. No excuses, no delays. Step outside, start seeking opportunities, and change your lives, Clara said, her voice decisive and without the slightest tremor. She knew that without immediate action, everything she had done would become meaningless. Ethan looked at his mother, determination in his eyes, though still touched with fatigue. "Mom, I will do it. I will find a job and carry out everything you ask. I will not give up." Clara looked at him and saw in his eyes a resolve she had never seen before. For the first time, Ethan was truly making a commitment, not offering excuses but choosing change. She knew that if he could maintain this determination, nothing would remain the same. Chloe said nothing at first, but she no longer sat in silence. She stood up, wiped away her tears, and looked at Clara. "I will find a job, Mom. I will not disappoint you again." Her words sounded fragile, yet at least they were the commitment Clara needed. Clara did not respond immediately. She simply stood there, letting them feel the seriousness in every word she had spoken. She knew this was the turning point she had been waiting for. Even if the change would be slow, at least today Clara felt a trace of hope. She had done everything she could. Now the responsibility and the decision rested in Ethan and Chloe's hands. "Only you can decide your own future," Clara said, then turned and walked away. There were no more words. She did not need to say anything else. Everything was already clear. Clara walked into the living room, the air inside the house unchanged from any other day. Yet her heart was beating harder than ever. Everything seemed to have shifted into a new rhythm, but she knew that this process of change had never been easy. Although she had seen the first signs from Ethan and Chloe, she still could not feel completely at ease. Change was not something that could be achieved overnight. Clara understood she needed to be even more patient, but her patience did not mean endless tolerance. She had waited, she had sacrificed so much, and now it was time to see the results of those efforts. A week had passed since she laid out clear demands, yet Ethan and Chloe still did not seem truly serious. Their promises were already beginning to fade, and Clara felt she could no longer remain the one who simply listened to empty words. She needed to see action. Life no longer allowed delay. She could not keep sitting still, waiting for change without clear movement from those around her. That morning, as Clara walked down the stairs, sunlight streamed through the windows and filled the room. Everything was quiet, but she knew that beneath the silence lay a quiet tension. She had prepared herself for what was coming. Today would not be like the days before. She would not speak aimlessly, nor allow herself to be swayed by delay. Clara had decided, and now it was time for her to take the next step. Ethan and Chloe were sitting in the dining room when Clara entered. Neither of them spoke. They simply sat there as if they knew this was not an ordinary day. Clara sat down across from them, her gaze steady and unwavering. She did not need to waste time on unnecessary words. What she needed was action. "Ethan, Chloe," Clara began, her voice neither soft nor harsh. "1 week has passed. You may say you have done your best, but what I see is delay. Have you found jobs yet? Have you begun fulfilling the conditions in the contract? I do not need to hear more excuses. I need action." Both Ethan and Chloe remained silent. Clara looked into their eyes without rushing. She knew that at this moment, they could not find another excuse. Only action could prove what they were truly doing and whether they genuinely wanted to change. Ethan spoke first, his voice slightly weary, as if there was nothing left to say. "Mom, I found a job, but it is not the one I hoped for. And Chloe is still searching." Clara did not respond immediately. She simply looked at Ethan, her eyes not angry, but without sympathy. She knew he had run out of reasons. What he needed now was the determination to act. "You are searching but waiting for a better job, aren't you?" Clara asked, her tone cool and sharp. "Ethan, life does not allow you easy choices. You must take whatever work you can to begin. I do not want to hear excuses anymore. You must carry out what you promised. Otherwise, I cannot continue helping you." Her words landed like a sharp wake-up call for both of them. Every word she spoke carried no indulgence. She was too tired of leniency, and now it was time for them to grow up. Change was never easy, but without change, they would remain trapped in dependence and stagnation. Chloe lowered her head, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "I understand, Mom. I will find a job. I will not disappoint you again." Ethan said nothing more, yet in his eyes Clara noticed a subtle shift. Even without words, she could sense that at last he understood his promises could not remain mere words. Clara looked at them once more, then said gently, I do not need you to be perfect. I only need you to truly begin. And never think that I will step back for any reason. You must stand on your own feet. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence was no longer heavy. Clara knew she had done the right thing. Her firmness was not just a reminder. It was a lesson about independence and responsibility. They had made a commitment, and now she could see that at least they were beginning to understand it. Chloe and Ethan said nothing further. They both understood there would be no second chance. Clara had given them an opportunity to change, and now everything depended on them. If they failed to change, they would lose everything. But if they were truly determined, they would receive what they deserved. And Clara, though still carrying many worries in her heart, felt a quiet pride in that moment. She had not allowed anyone, not even her own children, to take advantage of her tolerance any longer. Today was the day she began reclaiming her power, and she knew her life would never be the same again. Clara stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, studying her own reflection. She had once been a woman of sacrifice, always worried, pouring all her love into her family, especially into Ethan and Chloe. But after everything that had happened, Clara realized something important. She could no longer remain a shadow of herself, just to cover their mistakes. From difficult conversations to her firm refusal to step back, she had traveled a long road to reclaim her own worth. What she needed now was not endless sympathy or easy forgiveness, but respect and fairness. Looking back on the journey behind her, Clara could not help feeling a trace of regret. In the past months, she had sacrificed too much, not only materially, but emotionally as well. Yet now she had enough strength to face the truth, and more importantly, she no longer felt the need to please anyone. Clara was able to stand firmly, no longer allowing herself to be suppressed by weakness or by the expectations others placed upon her shoulders. Today, she would meet Ethan and Chloe once again, a meeting she knew would mark an important decision in the journey of change, not only for herself but also for the two children she loved. She could not allow everything to return to the way it was. Change had begun, and now it was time to see whether Ethan and Chloe could truly follow through. When Clara walked downstairs, she saw both of them already seated in the living room. They said nothing, simply sitting there in silence, as if waiting for an important decision. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the tension that filled the space. "What have you done over the past week?" Clara asked, her voice gentle yet powerful. She looked into Ethan and Chloe's eyes without confusion or fear. In recent days, she was no longer the woman who could be easily manipulated by words. Ethan lowered his head, his hands tightening around the teacup he was holding. He did not dare meet his mother's eyes, his expression filled with unease. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I found a job, Mom. It is not the job I wanted, but I have started. I know you were right. I will not give up." Clara did not respond immediately. She simply looked at him. In Ethan's eyes, she saw a clear change. Yet it was still not enough. Simple words could not prove true transformation. "That is a good step, Ethan. But remember that life does not allow you to give up easily. If you are only acting out of pressure, nothing will truly change in the long run. I want to see not only that you begin, but that you maintain that determination," Clara said, her voice calm yet sharp as a blade. Chloe, meanwhile, seemed more thoughtful. She no longer looked at her mother with complaint or resistance as before. There had been a shift in her perspective. "I also found a job, Mom. I do not know how difficult it will be, but I will try," Chloe said, her voice slightly unsteady, yet Clara could sense the sincerity in every word. Clara looked at her daughter and felt that at last Chloe was beginning to understand the importance of this change. Apologies and excuses were no longer enough. Action was what truly mattered. "You did well, Chloe. But remember, I do not need you to be perfect. I only need you to prove that you are willing to work and take responsibility for your own life. Do not let yourself fall back into the cycle of ease and delay again," Clara said, her tone gentle yet firm. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, but Clara could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Ethan and Chloe were no longer children trying to escape responsibility. They were beginning to understand that if they wanted change, they would have to face reality fully and without avoidance. Clara knew that although everything had not completely transformed, at least today they had taken the first step. And that was what she needed. Action, not words, would decide everything. She could not sit and wait any longer. But today, Clara felt she had done the right thing. We will continue on this path, and you must remember that I will never give up, and I do not want to see you give up either. If you truly change, I will be here to support you. But if not, then there will be nothing I can do for you, Clara concluded, her voice steady and unshakable. Chloe and Ethan nodded without saying more. Although they had not fully satisfied their mother, Clara knew that a true turning point had taken place. She was no longer the weak mother who endured everything in silence. Now she was the leader, the one who made decisions, and the one who would never step back again. As Clara walked out of the living room, she felt a new sense of pride. Although the road ahead was still full of challenges, at least today she had completed an important part of her journey. She no longer allowed herself to be ruled by weakness or fear. Now, she was the one in control of her life, and she would not let anyone or anything stand in her way. Clara stood by the window as the late afternoon light streamed through the glass panes, casting a warm golden glow across the room. She looked outside at the yellow leaves scattered across the yard, as if time itself were quietly drifting by. A month had passed since the intense conversation with Ethan and Chloe, and now Clara felt she was standing at the threshold of a real transformation. But would everything unfold the way she hoped? She knew that in life nothing was certain, especially when it came to changes involving her children, the ones she had devoted her entire life to caring for. Although Ethan and Chloe had begun looking for work, Clara still could not feel completely at ease. They had made promises, but she understood that words alone could not change everything. What truly mattered was whether they genuinely understood the value of work and independence. She could not continue watching her children sink into illusions and struggle to find their own path. One morning, while Clara was preparing breakfast, she received an unexpected call. It was from Chloe. Clara was not too surprised, yet a slight wave of concern rose within her. She knew Chloe was still not fully stable, that there were lingering uncertainties in her thoughts. She decided to answer. "Hello, Mom. I need to talk to you for a moment," Chloe said, her voice carrying a hint of tension. Clara sensed a difference in the way Chloe spoke. It was no longer discouragement or an attempt to avoid things like before. Something had changed. Clara sat down at the table, set the spoon aside, and looked out the window. "What do you want to talk about, Chloe?" "I received a job offer, Mom," Chloe began, her voice trembling slightly. "But it is not the kind of job I imagined. The company requires me to travel far and work overtime, and I do not know if I can handle it." Clara remained silent, not responding immediately. She understood that Chloe's anxiety was unavoidable, yet she also knew this was precisely the challenge her daughter needed to overcome. Life was not easy, and Chloe had to learn how to face reality. "Chloe, no job is perfect, but what matters is whether you are willing to do what is necessary to become independent, to stand firmly on your own feet." A long silence followed. Clara knew Chloe was thinking, and she could feel the shift within her daughter. Chloe was no longer avoiding responsibility, she was beginning to confront reality. "I know you were right," Chloe said after a while. "I am afraid I will not succeed, but I cannot keep living like this. I want to do something to change." Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. This was the change she had been waiting for. She did not need perfection, but she needed true determination and commitment from her children. "You will manage, Chloe. As long as you do not give up, you will overcome these challenges." The conversation ended in quietness, yet Clara knew it marked an important turning point. She had not only helped her daughter understand the importance of independence, but also helped her realize that difficulties were not something to retreat from. Clara knew that although the road ahead was long and demanding, at least today, Chloe had begun to change. That evening, as Clara sat down to dinner with Ethan and Chloe, she sensed a difference in the atmosphere. The heavy silence was gone, replaced by connection, by the feeling that they were walking together on a new path. Ethan had found a temporary job, and Chloe was preparing herself to work hard in her new environment. Though worries still lingered, they were beginning to understand that nothing came easily. Only patience and effort could bring results. Clara looked at her two children and felt her heart soften. This was the moment she knew that although life was never easy, she had done the right thing. Clara had not allowed the people she loved to continue living in laziness and delay. She had given them the opportunity to change themselves, and most importantly, she had never stepped back. "We have come a long way," Clara said, looking into Ethan and Chloe's eyes, "but this path has only just begun. I will always be here, but you must walk it yourselves." Both children looked at their mother, and in their eyes there was understanding and determination. Although they knew the future would not always be easy, at least they were no longer living in the illusion of effortless roads. Clara had taught them that only genuine effort could transform their lives. With every step Ethan and Chloe took, Clara felt she was not only supporting her children, but also rebuilding her own life. She was no longer a woman of blind sacrifice. Clara was decisive, aware of what she needed, and unafraid to fight for what she deserved. She had taught her children the most important lesson of all: nothing comes easily, but with enough determination, everything can change. And although the road ahead remained full of challenges, Clara knew she had done what was right, and she would never stop. As Clara's journey unfolds, we're reminded of the strength found in resilience, the courage born of determination, and the vital role boundaries play in our relationships. Standing your ground isn't always easy, especially when it involves the people you care about most. But Clara's story shows that real change begins the moment we decide to take ownership of our lives. If Clara's journey resonated with you, pause for a moment and look inward. Are you honoring the boundaries you need? Are you pushing yourself and inspiring others to grow? Never forget, transformation begins with a single choice: the choice to stop accepting less than what you truly deserve. If you connected with Clara's story, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson stood out to you the most? We'd love to hear your perspective and continue the conversation about growth and personal empowerment. Keep moving forward. The strongest, most authentic version of you is waiting just beyond those difficult decisions.